All right, I've been listening to the new Bring Me the Horizon album since it came out a few weeks ago. And man, I have a lot to say about it in terms of the production, the mix, the arrangement, songwriting, everything. So I'm just going to play the first track off the record and give you my reaction as we go. Okay, so there's so much to learn from the production on this record. This was done by Zach Cervini, produced. I think he did a lot of writing on this album, and he mixed it. It has his classic sound. I mean, his drums are amazing. The snare is awesome. And this is like a pop mix, right? It's just like the drums, the vocals, they really define the sound of the record. But there's a lot of other cool stuff that I'll get into. But right off the bat here, you got this guitar intro all by itself, but it's a cool tone. It's interesting. It's got some sort of stereo effect on it. It's really kind of grindy and crunchy, and it's got this bit crush digital effect going on. And so right away, you can learn a lesson as an upcoming mixer or producer. Like if you just have an instrument by itself, you've got to make it sound cool. Like make it sound interesting. Like you can imagine if this was just a regular, distorted guitar tone playing this riff off the intro, it'd be pretty boring, right? But there's a unique tone here, and then we get a bunch of sounds coming in. It's just cool. It's just interesting, and that's a theme that I'm going to come back to again and again. Now, once the band kicks in, like I said, pop mix, drums and vocals. I've been saying for years, like the things you got to nail are the drums and the vocals. If you get those right, there's a lot of forgiveness in everything else. Not that Zach needs it here. Everything sounds amazing, but the vocals are right up front. They're super bright, very compressed, like a pop vocal is, like a mainstream vocal. However, they're not hard to listen to. Even though it's so bright, even though it's so compressed, it's not harsh, right? And Zach's mixes remind me a lot of Chris Sordalgi. He's, I would say, was my favorite mixer up until Zach came along. And for Zach, his mixes are like just so nailed in the mid range. Like when I'm listening on my NS10s or CLA 10s here, it's perfect. It's a nice compact, full mid range. Sounds great. It translates everywhere. But then if you throw in AirPods or put it on the big speakers, it's got this extended, huge low end, this really extended, shiny top end. And so his mixes to me sound like CLA in the mid range with a lot of extra bottom end and a lot of extra top end. And I think that's why you're seeing so many of these bands like Bring Me the Horizon, Bad Omens, Architects, these heavy bands that have the melodic stuff, the catchy, hooky choruses and the kind of pop song structure that are crossing over into the mainstream. He does the heavy stuff so well, but he does the pop stuff so well. And so it's a perfect mix here. But let's keep listening. So cool kind of soundscape there. And again, this is a theme through the whole record, is that the song, the mix and the production is just interesting. Like it's not just the acoustic and a synth and his vocal. There's like these birds chirping and there's these other weird sounds happening, right? Too terrified. I like how the vocal just takes up so much space and there's some stereo vocals going on, but they're not like distracting, but they just make the lead vocal sound super wide. And you'll notice the guitars in this mix and really across a lot of Zach's stuff, they're kind of scooped in the, let's say like 1 to 2K area, whereas maybe 10 years ago, kind of the classic metalcore sound, it had a lot more like 1.5K, 2.5K kind of bite in them. His guitar is a little darker, a little fatter, which I think helps his vocals really stand out in more of a pop style. Well, life is Okay, so a couple really cool, important things to point out here that you can learn from. Now listen to the chorus. The guitars, the main rhythm guitars, they're pretty pushed back. Then when the re-intro happens, listen to how much the guitars and really everything, all the instruments just jump out and come up. So huge bump in the guitars there. I think the bass too, they just come right up front because the vocal's out there. And this is something that you should be doing in your mixes. You know, you should be automating a lot. Keep the listener engaged, keep their attention, and keep the mix interesting. So right here, it would have just been flat, kind of boring if the vocal drops out and then nothing takes its place. But obviously Zach has pushed up the guitars, he's pushed up that riff, made it really loud and heavy, which is even better because it kind of builds and builds and builds, and then totally drops out into this super mellow section.
Golden raspberry for the performance in your head.
And then even that little like that's kind of loud. It kind of jumps out, right?
Stop pushing daisies, no.
And it's almost a little out of place. And that's another thing I want to point out about this mix and this whole record is there is so much contrast and there's so much boldness here, but really that word contrast, I want you to take away from this video because this is what makes music industry interesting. And you hear this a lot on like top 10 pop songs, not all the time, but a lot of the time it's just these really big swings between really huge sounds and big arrangements down to these really tiny things. You know, we go from these huge rock anthem guitars to this little like chill little bassline groove thing. And that's a huge theme in this record. This is pretty tame compared to what happens in a lot of other songs in this record. If you go and listen to it, it's like it goes from this total pop amazing hook to this insane like deathcore style double kick breakdown, just chaos. Like there's so much bold creative action happening in these songs, and to me it just stands out so much. Like not many other bands do it like this, and from a producer standpoint it makes so much sense because think about the image of this band. You know, they're kind of hard, edgy, jarring. Like just when you think of this band, that's what it captures, right? It's like the teenage angst, that's their fans, right? But they're also trying to create these anthemic like mainstream hooks, and Zach has captured all of those elements of the band's personality and the band's image in these songs and how they sound and how the arrangement and production has been done. Like everything, it's cohesive. It's totally cohesive. The production and everything fits the image and enhances the image of the band itself. Super important.
So like a cemetery, hard to ignore. We're sick to the core. Our world's been buried. Where life is the law. A utopia. There is a home beyond our bones. Connect to the divine. It's okay to cry.
All right, speaking of automation, bold mixing moves, the first time I heard this song and that little synth, I think it's a synth, it kind of sounds like a guitar at the end, which you'll hear, but that synth, it takes up all the space. Now, listen, the guitars are in the back and they're playing that main intro riff, but they're so far back. Check this out. So I love how bold that is. Like it's almost to the point where it catches you off guard, where you're like, whoa, that synth is so loud. It's like almost drowning out everything else. But that's the point, and that's part of keeping the mixes interesting. I've probably already said that like 10 times in this video. Keep it interesting.
Cemetery.
All right, right here, before we go into the last chorus, everything kind of sucks out. Again, contrast, right? Really big, small, and notice that the vocal goes like totally dry here. This is really a classic kind of pop rock mixing tip. When you have a section like this that's small, right before like a big chorus, take out the effects, get rid of the reverb, get rid of the delay, have the vocal just really right up and dry in your face. It creates a lot of intimacy and, again, contrast.
Cemetery.
And right there, when it's just vocals before the band kicks in for the last chorus, we have this really cool like digital vocodery sounding background vocals, which you don't really hear in that much detail previously in the song. But here's an opportunity where it's just the vocal on its own, and it's push those background vocals up front louder and then tucks them back in so that we can hear those interesting textures. Again, keeps it very interesting. So again, here's another example of what I was talking about on this record. We've got this really mainstream pop chorus, and then at the end we've got this like metal blast beat over top. So that's just the first song, and I chose this one because it has a little bit of all the ingredients that you can hear throughout the rest of the record, and it gets even more extreme in terms of that mashup of the really heavy and chaotic and intense with the big pop style banger choruses and hooks. And I love this kind of music. I wasn't really a huge Bring Me the Horizon fan. Didn't really listen to them until the last few years when they started releasing the singles that ended up on this album. But I'm just a sucker for heavy music with pop song structure and big hooks. I absolutely love this stuff. And I think the way that this album has been written, arranged, produced, mixed is just... it's masterful. I don't think it could be any better. So huge shout out to Zach Cervini. It's at the absolute top of the game. Listen to his work, study it. There's so much you can learn from records and mixes that are done by the best in the game. And you should really be studying and listening critically like this. And I kind of like the way the band released this, because some of the songs on this album, they came out like, I think 3 years ago, and then another one a year later, and then a couple of years later, and they kind of ramped it up leading up to the album release. But a bunch of these songs I've already heard, but because it was dripped out so slowly, I was kind of excited and interested to go back and listen to those songs again, right? Whereas I think a lot of bands, they kind of just do like a single every couple weeks and then they drop the whole album and you're like, well, I already heard all these songs. So I think even the way that they released this was really effective. So check out this record if you haven't already, and if you have, maybe go back and listen through it again with some of these things in mind. Listen to how he keeps it interesting throughout the song, all the unique tones and sounds that are used, the way it's arranged, the way they create this contrast at all levels, right? It's from the songwriting, the arrangement, the production, the sounds that are chosen, and then the mix itself is just all layering on top of each other to create this interesting and compelling contrast and really keep your attention, catch you off guard a lot of the times. So phenomenally done. Lots to learn. See you in the next video.